Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here. Got another Master Duel video for you. So I just woke up to some pretty interesting news that got announced overnight for Master Duel here. Let's go ahead and take a look at the notifications and see what we are looking at. Wow, okay, so we have an upcoming Forbidden Limited List update. Oh, did they also update the Xyz event? They did. They actually banned Flying Sea. That's good. Good. Okay, well, I've already finished my Xyz Festival games, so I guess this isn't really applicable to me anymore, but it's very good that they actually banned Flying Sea. That was actually the main reason, like, why I didn't bother getting, like, games for the new event, or events for that matter, was for the Xyz Festival. Yeah, like I said, when I was playing it, Flying Sea was legal, so the games just honestly weren't that interesting on either end. And Legend Anthology, I played DDD. I didn't think games were interesting on either end there either. I was not a fan of the Legend Anthology event, but that's a take for another video, I suppose. In the meantime, let's just get into the meat and potatoes of what we've got here, the upcoming Forbidden and Limited List update. Now, I have already seen these, so you're not going to be getting my, like, initial reaction, but I just saw them for the first time, like, 10 minutes ago, so it'll still be a very fresh reaction. All right, let's go ahead and click this and take a look at what we've got. So, expected date for the Forbidden Limited List implementation, that's going to be the 28th of February, so just a little bit less than a week there. As always, the cards that are going down in the number that you can play are in blue, and the ones that are going up are going to be in white. So let's start with cards to be limited. Amano Iwado. For those who don't know what this card is off the top of your head, this is that 1900 attack rock spirit monster that the Runic stun decks like to use. That's the one that's, while it's in play, the activated effects of monsters, well, can't be activated. So yeah, that is the only card that's going to 1 here. How do I feel about this card? I'm honestly more baffled than anything else that this card is going to 1. And not stuff like there can only be 1, or skill drain, or just other, like, floodgates, like maybe Rivalry and Gozen are probably fine at 2, but skill drain and there can only be 1 are kind of the big ones. I guess Rivalry and Gozen should probably go to 1 as well, because those are more meta dependent along with there can only be 1. I would have expected those kinds of floodgates to go to 1 before something like a Amano Iwado. It's a very interesting hit, especially to put it at 1 when, again, we've seen all these other floodgates go to 2 before. I think what this means is, and I honestly, hear me out on this, I don't completely disagree with this mindset. I think what Konami is going for is they want to limit a more specific floodgate and keep the more generic ones at 2, because there are a lot of decks out there that unfortunately kind of live and die by the floodgates. And I'm not even just talking about, like, Stun Runic or Eldritch, but there's a lot of, like, rogue decks out there that, like, unfortunately the only way to really make them viable is to, like, jam floodgates into them, which sucks. Like, it, you know, in an ideal world, like, every archetype would have some, like, you know, fun and viable support, but unfortunately a lot of archetypes just don't have that. So I think what Konami is going for here is, again, I think they're limiting a more specific floodgate that only 1 deck uses, whereas they want to keep the continuous trap floodgates like skill drain, like there can only be 1 Rivalry Gozen, summon limit, that kind of a thing. They want to keep those around so that more decks can utilize them, which, you know, in a best of 1 format, this is not a hot take at all. In fact, this is an ice cold take. In a best of 1 format, we really do need to, like, hamper the number of floodgates that are available in any given format. Now, I don't think floodgates should be, like, banned outright. I think floodgates do have their place in any given metagame, but again, in a best of 1 meta, I think you really need to hamper and limit, like, the pool of floodgates. Like, I'm not saying every single one of them should go to 1, but the ones that I've mentioned, skill drain, there can only be 1, rivalry and Gozen, those should probably go to 1. Summon limit should probably be at 2 as well. If it's not already, I think it's at 3 still, but that's just my take on the whole, like, floodgate situation, and I think that makes sense why they limited this and not the other ones, and why all those other ones are still at 2. I don't 100% agree with it, but I think it does make sense. So, alright, now that we have covered Amano Iwado, let's go to the cards to be semi-limited. This is going to be kind of the bulk of what we're going to talk about here. Cards to be semi-limited. We have Runic Destruction, Runic Freezing Curses, Runic Slumber, and then Fusion Destiny. So, for those who aren't familiar just by title which Runic cards these are, Runic Destruction is the one that destroys a spell or trap card and then banishes 4. Freezing Curses negates a monster effect and banishes 4, I think? It's either 3 or 4. I think it's 4. It might be 3, I don't remember. And then Runic Slumber is the one that keeps a monster from being destroyed by battle or card effect for the first time that turn and then banishes 3. And then Fusion Destiny, of course, we all know is the card that, you know, they send off Vert with to make DP. That's that card. So let's talk about these Runic semi-limits and what kind of a hit this is for the deck. I don't think I'm alone in saying that this was the last kind of hit I expected for Runic. I think a lot of us thought that, like, either Hugin or Fountain, probably Fountain, was going to get hit. And I honestly thought that if Runic was going to get hit, it was going to be Fountain going to 2. Like, that's what I just thought was going to happen. But to be fair, we look at all these Runic Sprite decks, and they're pretty much universally all running 2. And they're not the first variant to do that. If you look at other, like, of course, pure Stun Runic is always going to run 3 Fountain, right? But, you know, you look at, like, Sky Striker Runic and some Synchro Runic variants, and those were also, like, usually only running 2 copies of Fountain. So, Fountain to 2 on the surface does sound like a good hit, and is a good hit for exactly the Stun Runic deck, but it doesn't do a whole lot for a lot of the variants out there. A lot of the variants that blend Runic with another archetype, most notably Sprite, of course, those can absolutely get away with only 2 copies of Fountain. And so, you know, you might say, like, okay, well, then we'll just hit Fountain to 1 instead. But then at that point, honestly, Runic just becomes borderline unplayable. Like, the idea that if their 1 Fountain gets answered, then they're just, like, out of the game for the rest of the duel, like, you know, as much as we all might hate Runic, well, I mean, I don't really hate Runic that much, to be totally honest, but as much as a lot of people hate Runic and probably responded to that with, like, yeah, so what, Runic's gone out of the game, that's fine. I really am not a fan of just completely pushing decks out of the game and making them completely irrelevant. I think that's a really lazy way to do bans, and I think it's honestly, like, just not a very, it's not one that, like, keeps the spirit of, you know, making sure that these decks are all viable but not overpowered. We, you know, in the process of making sure they're not overpowered, we do have to make sure that they're still viable as well. So Fountain to 1, I think, definitely would have been too harsh of a hit, in my opinion. So this makes a little bit of sense to me, but at the same time, it's like, it's interesting that these of all Runic spells got semi-limited. I would have expected to see Tip and Freezing, or not Freezing Curses, Flashing Fire here over Destruction and Slumber, if you're going to start semi-limiting a lot of the more powerful Runic spells. Now, I've seen some people, in like the 10 minutes that I've seen people, like, talking about this list, I've already seen a couple of comments on, like, the Discord of, like, oh, this doesn't really do anything to Runic, like, you just semi-limited 3 of their random cards, like, how does this actually address the issue? This does a lot more than it might look on the surface. I was surprised by this hit, but I think it is still a significant one, because it might look like, okay, 3 Runic spells got semi-limited, whoop-de-doo, but you gotta realize Runic really does need a critical mass of good Runic spells in order to be able to, like, do their thing, right? Like, when you look at Runic Sprite, there is, like, a certain number of Runic spells that you need, like, at least 15, but ideally 16, if I recall correctly, to make the deck, like, you know, function smoothly, because ideally every opening hand you're opening not just 1 but 2 Runic spells. You know, a Runic spell to summon a Hugin, and then another one to activate the fountain that you're going to search off of Hugin. Ideally, you're opening bare minimum 2 Runic spells, and to take out the ones that are actually, like, pretty good that you played 3 of, like a copy of each, you know, you might think, like, oh, Runic has a whole bunch of spells that can just slot in more, but, like, now you just start slotting in stuff like Golden Droplet and Smiting Storm, and what's the other one? Oh, Dispelling. If you weren't already playing Smiting Storm or Dispelling, like, you might have to play additional copies of Smiting Storm or Dispelling, which Runic does not want to do. Runic very much does not want to do that. They want to be ultra consistent, using only their best cards. That's why you would see all the builds playing, like, all the Sprite builds anyway, on, like, 3 Tip, 3 Destruction, 3 Curses, 3 Slumber, 3 Fire, and then, like, the one of, sometimes even the one of, like, random Runic spell. So I actually think that this hit is going to be fairly impactful. The Runic Slumber to 2 I think is going to be especially impactful, because on turn 1 in particular, Runic Slumber is such an important card for the deck to have, because it's like the only one they can really activate on turn 1 to trigger the fountain, right? Except for Tip, because you know the Runic Destruction, Freezing Curses, and Flashing Fire all require, and also Smiting Storm and Dispelling, require your opponent to have certain cards or have another condition fulfilled in order to activate them, right? And Golden Droplet, yes, that can be activated at any time, but it also gives your opponent a draw, which is a pretty big like downside. So Runic Slumber is like the most accessible Runic spell to trigger the fountain on turn 1, right? Because you can just use it on Hugin, and then you're just good to go. So to have this one in particular Semide, I think this is a much bigger hit, this one in particular, than it looks. Destruction and Freezing Curses are kind of... Freezing Curses makes sense. Destruction is a bit random. Let me take a sip of water real quick. Yeah, Destruction is the one here that's a bit random to me. I think this should have been either Tip or Flashing Fire. And, you know, I get, okay, they didn't hit Runic Tip because it's an Ultra, like, which is probably the case, honestly. Although, I don't know, I see people make that argument, but, like, you get full refunds for Ultras, so I actually think that's kind of a moot point. Because even if you tried to argue, like, oh, people invested, the only way I would see that argument being the case is if you hit so many Ultra copies that the deck becomes unplayable and makes, like, all of the other Ultras that you spent on the deck kind of obsolete, but also not refundable for the full dust. So, I don't know. It does also seem, I will admit that it does seem like Konami has a slight aversion to hitting ultra rare cards, like, after they've been released. Beforehand, as we saw with, like, Water Enchantress and Sprite Starter, they don't have a problem, you know, semi-limiting those as they come in. But once a card's actually been introduced in the game, I will admit, it does seem like they're a bit hesitant to hit ultra rare cards. So, maybe that's why we're seeing Destruction here. But again, I think even if you don't want to hit Tip, you could have hit Flashing Fire would have been the slightly better one to hit here. I guess Destruction might have been hit... I don't know. I really don't know. But very interesting semi-limits here with the Runic stuff. Now, here's the big question I'm sure everyone's wondering is, like, how is this actually going to affect Runic? Again, I've seen some people argue that this won't impact the deck at all. I disagree with that. I don't think it's going to, like, kill the deck or anything. I'm not even sure if certain Runic variants will even be affected, like, greatly. Like, I can see a world where Runic Sprite is still a tier 1 deck, but maybe Pure Sprite is a little stronger than it now, instead of the other way around, where Runic Sprite was... well, and here's the thing, too. Like, Runic Sprite did have a little bit more power than Pure Sprite, but, and I talked about this in our tier list video, the deck was also definitely overrepresented. Because, you know, Runic Sprite was a very solved deck. Like, you played the same, like, generally 35 to 36, or even 37 cards, like, every single time in that deck. But now that's going to be much less the case with 3 of the important Runic spells out. Because now you have to decide, like, okay, we need a certain critical mass of Runic spells for the deck to be playable, so now we have to slot in some of the weaker ones, or maybe some people are only going to slot in, like, 1, maybe 2 of the weaker ones, and then try out some new tech. There's a little bit more room to diversify as far as Runic Sprite lists go. Now, I think for the MCS this weekend in particular, we might see even more people, like, double down on Runic Sprite just to play it while it's still at full power, but... yeah, I think moving forward after this ban list change, we'll see Runic Sprite and other Runic variants tick down in power very slightly. Again, Runic Sprite, if I had to guess, will probably still be a tier 1 deck, but I think Pure Sprite might be slightly stronger now. Might be. We'll see. I think at worst it falls down to tier 2, but is... I don't know, that's the thing. I feel like even with these changes, Runic Sprite is probably still, like, ahead above, at least half ahead above, like, Mathmech, Sword Soul, and Branded Despia. I'm inclined to believe that. I'm not 100% sure if that's the case, but we'll just have to see how this overall affects their consistency. I suspect it will be, like, a non-zero amount. Like, it will be a noticeable amount, but will it be enough to kill the deck? I don't think so. But I think it will be enough to take its power level down, enough that we see a shift in the tier list there. As far as the other card that got semi-limited, here we have Fusion Destiny. I'm actually really glad to see this one here. Heroes desperately needed this card to be at 2. Having played Heroes a bit last season on my alt account, I can definitely tell you that, like, there are so many more combos, and really good combos too, that get opened up to you when you actually open Fusion Destiny in your hand. But then, of course, that's really hard when the card's only at 1. So I'm actually really glad to see this card do it too, and it's also fine, like, as far as, like, the DPE engine goes. I mean, God, when was the last time you had a DPE summoned against you and you weren't playing against hero, right? Like, it's been forever. I couldn't even tell you the last time. I think it was actually against, like, an Adamancipator deck, like, a few weeks ago. Like, it's very much randomly and here and there. So, like, if some decks have, like, a slightly more consistent DPE engine, I think that's fine. I don't think that's actually doing anything in this, this current meta. And honestly, the DPE decks are also very much, like, adventure decks, too. So, at least, like, 90% of the time they were. So, you know, Water Enchantress still being at 1, which I think that should probably stay at 1. But that still being at 1 is also going to keep the overall consistency of decks like that down. So, Fusion Destiny 2 is not only fine, but I think a very, very good change. And I'm really glad to see Konami, like, taking a proactive change like this. Now, if only we could get some stuff like Fractal back to 3. Fractal, again, I've said this before, Fractal staying at 2, I guess, kind of makes sense if Konami's thinking about Tri-Brigade Sprite, but, like, come on, Fractal does not make that deck. Especially when Sprite Sprint comes out. Like, I think when Sprite Sprint comes out, we can definitely have 3 Fractal again. We can be trusted with that, we'll be fine. So, alright, there's all the semi-limited cards, and then there were a few cards where the limit on the number of copies was completely lifted. So that's going to be Gen X Ally Birdman, Thunder Dragon Roar, and Orcust Harp Horror. So Gen X Ally Birdman, for those who don't know, is a level 3 Dark Machine with, I think, 1,300 attack points that can special summon itself from your hand by bouncing a card on your field back to your hand. So in the past, this was abused for, like, OTKs and FTKs, and this wasn't really an abuse of it, but it's also a prominent figure in old Monster Mash decks, which is a deck of 40 monster cards, no spells or traps. But for a long time, Gen X Ally Birdman was just like a combo piece. I know it was used in a lot of combos with, like, old Pre-Errata Ancient Fairy Dragon as well, but you know, with none of those combos having been prevalent for a very long time, and a lot of them, like, not even really possible anymore just due to, like, the ban list or erratas, or honestly just the meta making, you know, there's enough disruption and that kind of FTK is just completely obsolete. I think it's fine for Gen X Ally Birdman to come back to 3. Thunder Dragon Roar, this is a very cool card to come back to 3. Thunder Dragon Roar, if I recall correctly, is the one that's, it's like dark, it's got like 2,400 attack, and then if it's banished, you special a Thunder Dragon monster from your deck. I've used this card in Dragon Link, and it's very, very cool to see this card going back to 3. Thunder Dragon is not only a cool deck, but also a deck that's, like, pretty consistently since the start of Master Duel, like, been very playable, but just kind of been on the cusp of actually being, like, a tiered deck. I think there was, like, a minute, like, pre-Sword Soul, where Thunder Dragon was actually, you could very much consider that a tier 3 deck, but it's definitely been rogue ever since. So to see it get more tools is pretty cool. Thunder Dragon is also, like, a very splashable engine in a lot of, like, chaos-based decks, like light and dark decks, so, like, you know, Dragon Link, as I mentioned previously. So, I think it's cool to see the Thunder Dragon Roar go up to 3. That's a very welcome change, in my opinion. Orcust Harp Horror, this is a card that we've gradually seen go up from 1 to 2 before, and now it's up from 2 to 3, which is, I don't remember about the OCG, but isn't this card still, like, banned in the TCG? Which kind of blows my mind. It's either banned or at 1 or something like that, but I think it might actually be banned. In any case, yeah, Orcust, you know, as they've been getting more and more tools back, they just haven't really been, still haven't really been doing much. You know, like Thunder Dragon, a very, very good rogue deck, but doesn't really have the power to break into the upper tiers. So I think giving the deck a little bit of that power back in the 3rd Harp Horror, yeah, I think that's fine. And I think it's cool, once again, that Konami is being proactive as far as, like, not just hitting cards when it comes to Forbidden Limited List updates, but also taking them off as well, with, again, the Fusion Destiny being a very, very good semi, and then these all, I think, being very good on limits. So, let me think for a second. Final thoughts on this ban list. We definitely see Runic Stun take a huge hit here. I didn't really talk about that as much, but yeah, between these 3 Runic spells all going to 2, and then also the Amano Iwado going to 1, that definitely, and the cool thing actually about the Amano Iwado going to 1 as well, as opposed to something like Skill Drain or There Can Be Only One, is that the Amano Iwado was also often used to, like, not only act as a floodgate, but also on turn 1 stop the opponent from using any of their disruption, like the Ash Blossom or Ghost Spell on the Fountain, or you know, the Veiler or the Ash Blossom on the Hugin. So I think this is a very, very good choice to have this card go to 1, and we will definitely see Runic Stun lose a significant amount of power. I think, in the tier list, I already have the deck at tier 3. I don't think it's going to go down to Rogue or anything, but it'll definitely be bumped down among those tier 3 decks even further. Runic Sprite is going to be the more kind of up in the air one, as I mentioned before. I do think it does lose a good bit of consistency and in turn power by having all 3 of these cards go to 2. Again, the last thing that deck wants to be doing is putting in more copies of like Smiting Storm / Dispelling / Golden Droplet. So I really do think that will have an impact on the deck's power, but I don't think the deck is going anywhere based on these hits. I think Runic Sprite will definitely still be a force in the meta, and again, my personal prediction is that the deck will remain tier 1 moving forward, but will have a significant enough power drop that Pure Sprite will actually be the slightly more powerful deck. I don't think it's going to be like a huge upset or anything. Just like right now, even pre-banless, I don't think Runic Sprite is like that far ahead of Pure Sprite. I just kind of think those positions will switch within tier 1, but that's my prediction of what things are going to look like moving forward. So yeah, it's a nice little list that we got from Konami here. I've said this before, it's really cool to see like pretty much monthly ban lists. I think we are actually on monthly ban lists at this point from Konami, which is nice. It's very much needed for a digital and best of 1 platform like Master Duel. I know a lot of people, like including myself, were very worried when Master Duel first came out, and we went, I think it was like 4 months until we got our first ban list. So it's nice to see that that trend has not kept up, and that we're getting very regular ones. And honestly, so I've seen some people kind of criticize this list for being not impactful enough, for being like a small list. I think multiple small lists like this are way better than like less frequent but far like bigger, more impact ban lists. I don't think, again, as I said before, I don't think we need to nuke decks into the ground just because they need to get hit, right? Like, there's definitely a difference between, like, slightly hitting a deck to make it fair or more fair and completely just obliterating it so it's not playable at all anymore. And I think it's not a good idea to do the latter in terms of, like, solving the meta, quote-unquote, with the ban list. I like lists like this, and I'm looking forward to seeing more lists like this in the future. But yeah, like I said, those are my thoughts there. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and move now to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack. You'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, it's not just a pure donation. You do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot, as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now. So without further ado, this is Xlex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.